Hello everyone, I'm Kat from the Littlestown Library of the Adams County Library System, and welcome to tonight's reading of Aesop's Fables from the Aesop for Children, illustrated by Milo Winter from 1919. So our first story is called The Crow and the Pitcher. In a spell of dry weather, when the birds could find very little to drink, a thirsty crow found a pitcher with a little water in it. But the pitcher was high and had a narrow neck, and no matter how he tried, the crow could not reach the water. The poor thing felt as if he must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher, until at last it was near enough so he could drink. The lesson? In a pinch, a good use of our wits may help us out. Our next story is called The Ants and the Grasshopper. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have any time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it, the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance." And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. The lesson: there's a time for work and a time for play. Our next story is called The Ass Carrying the Image. A sacred image was being carried to the temple. It was mounted on an ass adorned with garlands and gorgeous trappings, and a grand procession of priests and pages followed it through the streets. As the ass walked along, the people bowed their heads reverently or fell on their knees, and the ass thought the honor was being paid to himself. With his head full of this foolish idea, he became so puffed up with pride and vanity that he halted and started to bray loudly. But in the midst of his song, his driver guessed what the ass had got into his head and began to beat him unmercifully with a stick. "Go along with you, you stupid ass," he cried. "The honor is not meant for you, but for the image you are carrying." The lesson is, do not try to take credit to yourself that is due to others. The next story is called A Raven and a Swan. A raven, which you know is black as coal, was envious of the swan because her feathers were as white as the purest snow. The foolish bird got the idea that if he lived like the swan, swimming and diving all day long and eating the weeds and plants that grow in the water, his feathers would turn white like the swan's. So he left his home in the woods and fields and flew down to live on the lakes and in the marshes. But though he washed and washed all day long, almost drowning himself at it, his feathers remained as black as ever. And as the water weeds he ate did not agree with him, he got thinner and thinner, and at last he died. The lesson is, a change of habits will not alter nature. Our next story is called The Two Goats. Two goats, frisking gaily on the rocky steeps of a mountain valley, chanced to meet, one on each side of a deep chasm through which poured a mighty mountain torrent. The trunk of a fallen tree formed the only means of crossing the chasm, and on this not even two squirrels could have passed each other in safety. The narrow path would have made the bravest tremble. Not so our goats. Their pride would not permit either to stand aside for the other. One set her foot on the log. The other did likewise. In the middle they met horn to horn. Neither would give way, so they both fell, to be swept away by the roaring torrent below. The lesson is, it is better to yield than to come to misfortune through stubbornness. The next story is called The Ass and the Load of Salt. A merchant, driving his ass homeward from the seashore with a heavy load of salt, came to a river crossed by a shallow ford. They had crossed this river many times before without accident, but this time the ass slipped and fell when halfway over. And when the merchant at last got him to his feet, much of the salt had melted away. Delighted to find how much lighter his burden had become, the ass finished the journey very gaily. Next day, the merchant went for another load of salt. On the way home, the ass, remembering what had happened at the ford, purposefully let himself fall into the water, and again got rid of most of his burden. The angry merchant immediately turned about and drove the ass back to the seashore, where he loaded him with 2 great baskets of sponges. At the ford, the ass again tumbled over, but when he had scrambled to his feet, it was a very disconsolate ass that dragged himself homeward under a load 10 times heavier than before. The lesson is, the same measures will not suit all circumstances. Our next story is called The Lion and the Gnat. "Away with you, vile insect," said a lion angrily to a gnat that was buzzing around his head. But the gnat was not in the least disturbed. "Do you think," he said spitefully to the lion, "that I am afraid of you because they call you king?" The next instant he flew at the lion and stung him sharply on the nose. Mad with rage, the lion struck fiercely at the gnat, but only succeeded in tearing himself with his claws. Again and again the gnat stung the lion, who now was roaring terribly. At last, worn out with rage and covered with wounds that his own teeth and claws had made, the lion gave up the fight. The gnat buzzed away to tell the whole world about his victory, but instead he flew straight into a spider's web. And there, he who had defeated the king of beasts came to a miserable end, the prey of a little spider. The lesson is, the least of our enemies is often the most to be feared. Pride over a success should not throw us off our guard. And our final story for today is called The Leap at Rhodes. A certain man who visited foreign lands could talk of little when he returned to his home, except the wonderful adventures he had met with and the great deeds he had done abroad. One of the feats he told about was a leap he had made in a city called Rhodes. That leap was so great, he said, that no other man could leap anywhere near the distance. A great many persons in Rhodes had seen him do it, and would prove that what he told was true. "No need of witnesses," said one of the hearers. "Suppose this city is Rhodes. Now show us how far you can jump." And the lesson is, deeds count, not boasting words. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.